Great. Well, we will begin today's breakout session. Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you for those who have joined the CTech event, American Innovators, America's Next Tech Upgrade event. And this breakout session is a panel on a modern tech workforce. I'm Josh Westfall, the Director of Policy and Programs at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, and I'm joined today by Vikram Iyer, the Vice President of Global Public Policy and Strategic Communications at Postmates, along with Brian Bernard, the Senior Manager of Federal Affairs at Uber, and Anurag Varma, the Vice President and Head of Global Government and Public Affairs at Infosys. Before we jump into today's panel, I want to do a few housekeeping items. One is that as we're using Microsoft Teams, in order to keep the panelists at the top of your screen, if those who are not panelists could make sure that you shut off your video. This way everyone else who does have the video on will come to the top. I believe we have the controls. We have muted all of those who joined, but if you could just check to make sure that you are on mute, that would be great for those who aren't speaking. And I also wanted to just acknowledge again that this event with CTech, they launched 4 white papers that came from from today's discussion, and I'm putting now in the chat both a link to the white papers and a link to the white paper on the modern workforce, which is what today's panel is covering. And so with that, I do want to jump into some just general stats on the modern workforce to kind of get us started and set the scene. And then we will jump right into our panel discussion with some general questions, upskilling questions, gig economy, and immigration questions. So for those that are new to the space or are growing their knowledge in this area, the modern talent marketplace is rapidly changing like never before. It's pushing employers and HR departments to rethink the way that we develop, hire, upskill, and reskill our modern workforce. The shelf life of skills is getting shorter and shorter. The World Economic Forum reports that 65% of children entering primary school today will end up working in a new job type that doesn't exist. Let me repeat that again. 65% of children are being trained for jobs that do not exist today. Additionally, 50% of technical subject knowledge that is acquired during 4-year degree programs is outdated by the time that students graduate. Yet the opportunity for upskilling and reskilling that could result in earning a credential has never been more promising. A 2019 report found that there is more than 730,000 unique credentials in the United States. However, as a country, we are still facing a skills gap. The 2020 U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation report, Hiring in the Modern Talent Marketplace, found that 74% of hiring managers agree that a skills gap persists in the U.S. In that same report, they also found that a majority of employers still list the time to hire as a challenge, coupled with the time it takes employees to get to full productivity. So what are we going to do to solve these modern workforce challenges of our time? Well, I do not have all the answers, but I have a great panel of innovative employers here today to discuss what they're doing in this space. And so I think the best way to start off is giving each of them the opportunity to highlight some of their work in this space and what they're doing. So I'd like to start off with Vikram first, followed by Brian, and then Anurag. And if you could just take about a minute or so to introduce yourself, the company that you work for, and highlight some of the initiatives that you're working on as they relate to the modern tech workforce. So Vikram, we'll have you go first.
Wow, that is a month 8 of pandemic fail. Thanks everybody for joining us, and thanks to the Chamber for hosting this important conversation. For those that may be unfamiliar with Postmates, we're an on-demand delivery app, kind of born out of this notion that right now in the era of e-commerce, it's very easy and convenient to kind of have this big box mentality of you build a warehouse on the outskirts of cities and then funnel goods into town. It's all hyper convenient. We all use Amazon all the time, but it also shortchanges your or my desire to go to a local brick and mortar retailer, maybe a hardware store, maybe a pharmacy, or maybe a local taqueria. The Postmates mission was sort of born out of this inverse concept that we can treat the city as the warehouse, index the product offerings of what's sold in that city, and then local brick and mortar retailers to the tools they need to distribute their goods. Those tools certainly include a matching algorithm in which customers on one corner of a city can meet businesses in another corner of a city, but it also includes the 300,000 couriers that we have performing on-demand delivery work right now. And during the COVID pandemic, we've actually seen, against the backdrop of 50 million jobless claims in this country, an 84% increase in the number of workers looking to sign up for a platform just to earn additional wages or to supplement or complement existing work. And so we take this responsibility very seriously in terms of not just can we have a transactional relationship with our couriers or our gig economy workforce, but how do we actually, as a technology company, both for our own in-house colleagues, but also for this massive distributed network, invest in their overall upward mobility. And I'll just share 2 data points for you as we kick off this conversation. We've spent a lot of time with our on-demand gig workers, and I know that as a country right now, the gig economy is having a very massive debate about the politics of classification. But I think what's even more important to understand about the cohort of those 300,000 gig economy Postmates workers is that 40% of them, tell us that they're actually looking for full-time work. And only 20% of that 40 tell us that they have a college degree or an accredited community college degree. So Postmates is actually investing massively in education as a benefit for this distributed on-demand workforce by offering a mix of online learnings, in-person learnings, apprenticeship programs, and pre-apprenticeship programs. And in all instances, we've actually found that not only does this help create a stickiness and a sense of community between a company like ours, like Postmates, and this massive workforce across the country, but it also, in the last 7 months alone, we've graduated 12 classes of Postmates off of our platform and into full-time jobs, especially against the backdrop of a very frustrated economy. So I think getting a chance to exchange ideas on this side, not just in terms of job training and job development, but also recognizing where there are gaps between current skill sets and where the economy couldn't be more important now than ever.
Great, thank you, Vikram. That was a great intro to get things started. Brian, you want to explain a little bit about what Uber's doing in this space?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Thanks again for having me today. I've been with Uber for about 1 year now, helping to manage our federal policy on workforce and privacy issues. And kind of like what Vikram said, Uber started as a very simple idea. What if you could hail a ride from your phone? And we grew quickly as a global brand. And as we grew, our mission evolved to bring transportation to everyone, everywhere. I joined Uber from the Department of Transportation, where I focused on roadway and vehicle safety issues, particularly with the intersection of tech and transportation. Before that, I spent some time on Capitol Hill in a few different roles. But right now, a lot of my time is also focused on COVID-related initiatives. As you can imagine, the pandemic has been a major challenge, and we have taken a lot of important steps to add health and safety precautions to the entire Uber experience. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to the discussion.
Great, thank you, Brian. And then last but not least, Anurag for Infosys.
Hi, everyone. Thank you to CTech for having myself and Infosys represented here. Infosys is one of the largest companies that a lot of people don't know about. We're in the IT services business. We have about 250,000 employees in 50 countries around the world. IT services is the best example I can give to people is kind of like a Fortune 500 company has a law department, and then they hire an outside law firm. So on IT services, if let's just say you are a client of ours that has one of these and wants to put a payment method and attach it to it as an idea, again, I'm not revealing the client name, then you hire a company like ours, and we provide really smart people. Now, where do the smart people come from? Where do they live? All of that used to be all over the world, large numbers in India. And even many of them who were here in the US came from India because we didn't have that level of skills and available to us if you're just competing against everyone. All of that started to change about 3 years ago. We decided we needed a local workforce for technology reasons. As more and more solutions were becoming automated, the strength that we really brought to our clients was not in problem solving, but in problem finding. Is to be able to go and look around and say, you know what, that doesn't make any sense over there. And all of a sudden, that became a skill we were looking for. So more and more, we decided, let's build a gigantic, massive local tech workforce that required bringing our ability to skill. For example, on my phone, I have 1,150 IT courses. That's just one of the skills that we have at our company because we're always skilling people. We next thought, and I'm going to get to this in a minute, we next thought that why don't we put all these people in regional centers across the US? Sounded like a great idea, and then COVID hit, right? And all of a sudden, this whole idea of bunching people in different centers and office buildings, state-of-the-art office buildings, but yet office nonetheless, was a great idea and was working out really well for Infosys in creating this local tech workforce around the country. And it's something now we're dealing with, but we get to deal with it part and parcel with an increase in digitization. So the fact that we were skilling up, right, does help that we have more and more infrastructure around skilling. The question of how does work from home fit into delivering solutions to clients and so on, we're going to talk about that during the course of this, but I just wanted to give you a bit bigger sense of who we are as a company and the types of work that we do with corporate America.
Great, thank you, Anurag. So across all three companies here, it seems like there's a lot of challenges that you're facing, a lot of innovative ideas trying to build that modern tech workforce. I want to get more granular here. Across your work in this space, what do you believe is the primary workforce challenge that your company or companies in general are facing for the modern tech workforce? And do you think that problem, is that a human problem? Is that a technology problem? Is it a little bit of both? And I'd like to start this conversation with Anurag because there was a great Thomas Friedman article in the New York Times that actually highlighted the president of Infosys, who talked a lot about this forward thinking of the workforce and what and how we can be more agile and move towards a modern talent marketplace. So Anurag, maybe you might want to talk a little bit about that work and respond to this question.
Sure, thank you. So not to be gratuitous towards the topic of this panel, but skills for sure is central to it. Do we have the infrastructure, the online platforms, when no one is gathering in large training centers? Like, do we have the online platforms, the accessibility, and then the content for skilling? And that's been a big concern of ours. As we move forward, the issue of being disconnected to a workplace, right, has infrastructure needs behind it, right? So skills is both a human and a technology problem. The infrastructure, whether it be broadband, access to hardware, are we falling short of tapping into the whole population, right? If you don't have a strong enough Wi-Fi, or if you don't have Wi-Fi at home, if you don't have a laptop, right, are you being left out? Right. And it's to all of our detriment to not get as many people involved in the skills game going forward. We'll get to this later in the conversation, but a real opportunity in the middle of all of this is that we're finding that you can distribute work a little bit more. You can do image recognition. So image recognition costs less to the customer, to our customer, right? And we can get people into technology through other jobs, and I'm a lawyer by training, so I'll just say like paralegal jobs for technology, right? You don't necessarily have to be fully 4-year degree in Python, and so I think it's a combination of human and machine. But at the end of the day, on both sides, it's about capacity and infrastructure.
Great. And Vikram and/or Brian, would you like to mention what do you think the primary workforce challenges of today? And again, is that human, technology, a little bit of both?
Yeah, so I think there's two. The first one is more immediate, and I would say it's short term, hopefully short term, and that is the health and safety of our customers, right? So, and when I say customers, I mean both drivers and riders, and that's paramount. When it comes to COVID, we're absolutely tapping into technology and human skills and ingenuity to address a lot of the concerns that I think the pandemic has certainly brought to the fore, whether that's technology to make sure that drivers and riders are wearing masks, or ways to get restaurant quality meals delivered safely to families at homes across the country. But I think medium term and in the coming years, how do we make sure that gig workers like drivers and couriers can maintain their independent status while unlocking their ability to tap into some of the benefits that a lot of traditional employees enjoy? That's a major item that we're focused on at Uber.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point in that second category Brian laid out. I'll also add that, and maybe this is similar to the infrastructure frame that Anurag was pointing to, but we're spending a lot of time understanding if we take education as a benefit. Brian pointed out the fact that we're trying to extend more traditional battery of benefits to not just your full-time employee type population, but even the self-employed workers. Underneath that, we're identifying that there are a lot of workers on our platforms, specifically on the Postmates platform that I mentioned, that do tell us that they're looking for additional skills, additional job opportunities, and potentially want to spin off the Postmates platform. And that's a perfectly reasonable relationship for us to have because we don't expect them to be Postmates for life. But when we dig into that and we start to unfurl, can education be part of the battery of benefits that we think about in this country? That if we say that there should be things like healthcare, there should be things like long-term savings, there should be things like an accident insurance, then why not ensure that a population that tends to look to our apps to earn for various different purposes, that if they're also trying to upskill, they have access to those skills when they're outside of the K through 12 or higher ed pipeline, right? So that sort of unquenchable thirst for lifelong learning and continuous learning is really, really important. And then you layer over that this piece of infrastructure that Anurag was pointing to, which is this is an inherently mobile workforce. So even if we give them opportunities to take certain classes or subsidize the cost for courses, then how do they actually do that when a good chunk of their work is inherently moving around, physically moving around, either to make deliveries or because they're stitching together other incomes? And that's why we centered around those 4 pieces that I previewed earlier. The first is we started launching a pilot in the West Coast with an organization named JBS that actually taps into US Department of Labor grants to try and provide job placement services and career development resources. And I think that World Economic Forum data point that you showed, 65% of kids today are learning or skilling up for jobs that don't exist. I think we even need to take a step further back and think about what about those gig economy workers that are trying to get skills that could be as robust as Python or learning how to run a CRM if you want to work at Salesforce, but are also as quote unquote elementary as how do you update your LinkedIn profile? How do you even look for jobs within your community if you're busy and you're on the go? And so this full service suite of in-person classes and programming through the JBS Job Search Accelerator is how we first started our foray in educating this gig economy workforce. The second rung was partnering with an organization called EDX, which I think is something that others may be familiar with as well, but gives our Postmates a grant to online certifications and courses that translate at colleges and universities. And this can range, again, from one side of the equation of English as a second language all the way to marketing and coding skills. And then the third and final rung for us was actually taking an advantage of the apprenticeship programs in this country and Department of Labor apprenticeship models as a means to at least pipe people in to local funding that could actually skill up workers off the platform. And Postmates as a company has actually seen gig workers go through these apprenticeship programs and come in within our company. So that's a long-winded way for us saying that if you take a look at how we think about skilling and learning, we can't just create a binary that it's all about the automation, the AI, the every 2-week McKinsey report that comes out about where we need the skills to go. We also have to make sure that we're looking at workers right now who maybe don't have a natural off-ramp to a local vocational school or a community college, but maybe companies like ours can invest in them to be able to get access to meet them where they're at in an inherently mobile economy.
That was great. And Vikram, that was a fantastic transition into the first big topic on upskilling and reskilling. So you've already hit on a lot of good points there. So I want to then turn to either Anurag or Brian, whoever would like to take this first question about when it comes to upskilling and reskilling, about what are some tools, what is your company doing to retool and train and upskill and reskill workers in across your industry in different fields? And what are some of the obstacles that you're facing that other companies might be facing more generally? And can you also let us know if is there any way that technology can help alleviate some of those obstacles, or have you found it to be more helpful in recent times than maybe in a few years prior to now? And so I'll leave it up to either of you who wants to jump in first.
Brian,
Sure.
go ahead.
Okay. So yeah. So I mean, I guess what I'll go to is what Vikram raised earlier. We definitely see that as a challenge, right? Too often, I think a lot of those who are participating in either part or full-time work don't have the freedom to pursue their long-term goals. And we don't think drivers should have to compromise, right? We don't think that they should have to compromise between flexible work with long-term opportunity and goals. That's why Uber launched a partnership with Arizona State University. So we're giving free tuition to over 250,000 drivers across the country. That means fully paid for tuition is provided for 80 plus undergraduate degree programs. And that way, drivers are able to fit higher education around their lives and keep pursuing work the way they want to, whether it's through Uber or other platform companies. And then one other thing that I'd like to highlight that we're doing in addition to that is that if for some reason the driver prefers to do this, they can also transfer this opportunity to an eligible family member, relative, or another dependent. So they can transfer that if they think it's best fit for their family.
I like the flexibility in that. One follow-up question, I guess, to that would be, is there a specific degree or career pathway that those that Uber drivers that have to follow, or like a list that they come from, or is all credentialing possible through Arizona State University?
So like I mentioned, there's over 80 different programs that they're eligible for, and the only requirement for the program is that, and this is for Uber Pro drivers, that they maintain their active status with Uber.
Great. And Anurag, are there some retooling and upskilling initiatives that you're working on that you'd like us to be aware of?
For sure. Thank you. We have two different angles we're coming at it. One is one program we've quickly pulled together and with some excellent partners related to the current economic situation, the recently unemployed. We call it radical reskilling. And it is this idea that just because your industry, let's call it hospitality or travel, your industry is going through a rough go of it, and you were mid-level management or something, just because there's no room for you right now because the industry is in bad shape doesn't mean you're not needed elsewhere. Like let's a logistics company. I mean, let's just say, and so the concept was, how do we find that person? How do we see what they could be qualified for, both objectively and subjectively, right? How do we skill them and match them up with someone in a sector they never even thought about? Right, this idea that was mid-level manager at Marriott, there's a perfect position for her or him at Amazon, for example. Like that was the concept. So what we did is we created the technology platform for the course offerings and the content and the interface. And then we partnered with nonprofits who are in the business of assessment, talent assessment, right? Again, both through using an AI tool where they would get a series of questions to understand what their aptitudes were, and then also a self-assessment where you would say, "And my name is Brian, and I'm good at this," right? Like something, and then you would put them onto our platform. There would be 160 courses there, and they'd come out and there would be kind of hand holding throughout the process, and you'd come out the other side, and that's where you'd have corporate recipients. And again, I think of like who's doing really well right now, logistics companies, right? So there'd be a company waiting on the other side. And one of the big facilitators partners in this are like state and local governments. But then there's a whole series of nonprofits that also are there. Now, that is one example. The second example I'm going to give you, and by the way, both examples have the same, very similar challenges. So the second example is what we're doing through our foundation, which is K through 12 STEM and computer science education. There we're focused on train the teacher, right? We used to have national teachers conferences where we would fly in, our foundation would fly in 500 teachers from 45 states, and they do week-long, we'd house them in a university dormitory, and we'd give them a week of education. And especially if they came from a school where they didn't have that training, they could go back and teach. Now we've built an online platform for them, right? And they can learn 24/7, and then also build a community of teachers there. The problem with both of those are great. You built this platform, it totally works. It's input and output, right? How do you get the word out to them? How do you get them signing up and coming in? And then on the backside, where does that go, right? And so it is an issue on both of them. Somebody who's recently unemployed, how would they ever even know that there's this platform, that exists? Well, you have to have an advertising. What is the cost on the back, and what is the cost of someone hand-holding someone through this process? Even if it's nominal, someone's got to pay it, right? So you would think that the beneficiary employer on the backside, that's one model. Governments are looking at seeing if they could reallocate their resources, right? So we're actually right in the throes of this right now. We're about 6 or 8 weeks into this. We're starting these partnerships, and these are the types of challenges we're dealing with on both sides. And again, 2 different categories of learning, but learning nonetheless.
Great. And actually, that we are going to get into costs of upskilling, because I know that's a big question for a lot of employers. But I did want to give you, Vikram, the chance. You did get to tell us about the 3 steps and initiatives for upskilling and reskilling that Postmates is working on. But I didn't give you the chance to talk about, are you seeing any challenges or obstacles in that area?
Yeah, and sorry for answering those questions out of turn, but I think with that backdrop, some of the obstacles that we see are truly policy obstacles, right? I think in Brian alluded to this, but when we think about how to advance new benefits for workers, even just the question of how workers are treated, that we are subsidizing the cost of some of these training programs and these education programs can unfortunately bleed into a separate topic of concern and consideration that I know this community is very well aware of. But do you treat a worker as an employee or as a contractor? And then if you give the contractor some panoply of benefits, does that then trigger all of the misclassification considerations with that binary conversation? That's a huge problem, where even trying to do the right thing and meet the national moment to make sure that workers that want to go back to work have the skills to do that on the other side of the pandemic creates real angst, and can frankly be a deterrent effect from companies actually investing in the way Uber has or in the way Postmates have. So I think that's one policy consideration that colleagues in the space continue to trumpet in front of members of Congress. The second policy consideration, at least from our end, that we've seen is on the funding side. And I don't want to get out ahead of this, but we've seen some interesting legislation from Senators Ben Sass and Amy Klobuchar about lifelong learning accounts that sort of incentivize both employers and the government to invest in kind of a pre-tax savings vehicle. Think of it as an HSA. And I think we can meet the worker with so much funding from the Postmates side, but additional funding sources, whether it's coming from nonprofits like Anurag mentioned, or sorry, resources broadly defined, but whether it's nonprofit knowledge, whether it's community foundations, or whether it's government entities themselves, I think meeting all of those stakeholders, convening them, and having some policy fixes around how to fund up for sustainable, scalable ways, especially for such a large workforce, is something that we continuously think about and try and advocate around, certainly on the Hill, but even in state legislatures.
Thank you for bringing up those policies as well. That's definitely good things to look at and consider moving forward as newer options come. So something that came up with thinking about these public-private partnerships, but also what each of you have discussed a little bit, is that upskilling isn't necessarily easy. Upskilling incumbent workers also costs something. It's not just free if someone is paying that bill. So for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, most of the members there are small to medium-sized businesses. So I was hoping you could kind of talk both from your lens of where you're working in this space, but also out to considering small and medium-sized businesses on, do you find that the case to be that the investment in upskilling is offset by having a more talented workforce and giving mobility, economic mobility, and career mobility to your employees? And did you find, and are you receiving, or do you see that you have an ROI, or return on investment, for this investment in upskilling for your business? Has it paid off in the long run? And so I want to see, is anyone want to be a go-getter and answer that question first?
I mean, I know For Uber, one thing that comes to mind is that some of our lines of business have already done a good job of recruiting from within, and they've proven that it doesn't necessarily need to be expensive to upskill. I think about, for instance, like our advanced technology group, ATG. We have brought up our mission specialists, so they have opportunities to go from professional test driver to supporting fleets and fleet operations longer term. And I think what we're seeing, especially when it comes to like self-driving, as the technology improves and advances, it's likely that we're going to see a greater need for supporting the deployment of that technology. And we're going to have to transition folks from mission specialists all the way up to fleet operations management. So that's just one area that comes to mind from our perspective over at Uber.
Yeah, I will say, this is Anurag here. So again, let's go back to who we are as a business. We, at the end of the day, we provide, talent where it's needed, in the tech skills market. So for us, where the cost efficiencies are we providing as precise talent as needed, right? And more we're finding that we don't need somebody with a generic 4-year computer science degree for such and such issue, right? So let's just say our client is a drugstore that's trying to turn into a medical clinic, right? And have, all of their patient services on their phone, right? For that, you don't even necessarily need a programmer, right? You need somebody who can think about user experience, somebody who's a designer working with a team of smart digital folks, right? Or someone we can just skill in 12 weeks, even though their 4-year degree is in design or their 2-year associate's degree is in design, right? So it's this idea of trying to be more nimble on where the talent comes from. And I will tell you, as of 2.5 years ago, Infosys, in our 37-year history at that time, had never hired anyone without a 4-year degree, right? 2 years ago, we decided, you know what? Let's change that. Why? And so we started partnering more with community colleges. So going back to cost, if someone says, I can't go to a 4-year degree because I just can't pay for it, right? But I am going to keep educating myself and I'm going to go to a community college. It's not really the ROI. There's a joint ROI there, right? They need to come out with some useful skills that's useful to Infosys, right? And it's a win-win. The ROI for both wins, right? So less and less do we think that a 4-year degree is the answer, right? And it's more stackable skills. It's more modular skills, right? And that will actually change the efficiencies of education. So if there's any universities on this call, I'm so sorry because that doesn't quite fit with the model, right? But that's kind of where we're going to be looking for our tech skills, is that we're going to help the market define what skills, help build that capacity in whatever is the most accessible to talent model, community colleges, high schools, wherever that talent is. And that's why ASU, they're a partner of ours too. ASU has a real forward-looking view on skilling out there, and they're one of our partners for that reason. So,
great, thank you for that. And we have found that there's, if there are, university partners listening to this and stuff, we have found that there, ASU being one of them, that there is innovation in this space where they're breaking down 2- and 4-year programs into what does the syllabus look like and what are the skills you get from each credit that you're receiving, and how then does that add up to some more career pathways. So also, as we're innovative in the business community, there's also looking of ways to innovate the education and training community as well, of rethinking the way that we supply talent. And so Vikram, wanted to make sure I get you in here as well as it comes to the cost of upscaling, and if you found that it's the return on investment for that, or any concerns there.
Yeah, I mean, so it's twofold for us. I think number one, have to be candid, right? Like these investments, if they, especially with partners that we have a symbiotic relationship with, their well-being is our well-being, and so there is both kind of a business incentive there, but there's also a kind of it's the right thing to do incentive to this, right? So on the what we've been talking about, gig economy workers for Postmates, for couriers, for most of this conversation, I'll cut it another way. We are a 3-sided marketplace, much like Uber Eats, and we have restaurant partners, and we've seen an 8x increase amidst the pandemic of the types of partners that want to join us right now. We've onboarded 7,000 pharmacies amidst the pandemic. Farmers market vendors in Washington, D.C. actually have sought to sign up on the platform so that way they have a digital brick and mortar presence, even if they never had a traditional one. And so some of the education that we're doing there is less so about the traditional skills as we think about them spinning out and getting a job, but it's a technical literacy that's needed to meet the moment of a pandemic, right? If you have businesses that previously didn't either want to use on-demand delivery apps or maybe didn't even know how to use on-demand delivery apps, there is a market for needing to not just pitch them on the business side of like, this is great for business and it's great for us to make money, but also try and get them to understand everything from, search engine optimization, how to be discovered when you're actually looking to be found first if you're a taqueria and you don't want to keep getting eclipsed by, say, a larger chain like a Chipotle when people are searching for food delivery, or even data analytics. If somebody's saying, I'm trying to make profit and make payroll at this time, District of Columbia or City of San Francisco is giving me the ability to do 25% of indoor dining, X amount of outdoor dining. How do I actually make sure that those combinations of sales plus delivery meets me where I want? Those are the types of analytics that they're asking to get right into. And certainly we benefit as a technology employer for having that insight in-house, but it does us collectively a lot of good to export that knowledge. And we've structured various curriculum trainings with all of our merchant partners as well as new merchant partners, so that way they can get those insights and perform better. And that certainly incentivizes us in that way. But I would be remiss if, on the courier side, if I didn't acknowledge that part of our desire to invest there is not necessarily because we think they will stay on our app longer. But I do think that platform companies like ours in the gig economy have a responsibility to invest in the right way. So that way the notion that a part-time work or supplemental work can also give them the type of off-ramp they might like into other forms of work. I think that creates just a rising tide lifts all boats kinds of effect, and certainly something that we are interested and eager to do, because the experimentation that we see when we provide workers that are short-term, mobile, low-wage workers at times, the insights we gather from that exported back to lawmakers and policymakers, we think is a good down payment to understand that we're skilling all types of workers and not just certain classes of workers.
Great, thank you, Vikram. And we're going to stick on, I could talk about upskilling and reskilling all day long, but I do want to switch into some gig economy questions that have been brought up through different conversations. And so this one is related to Postmates and Uber and your work in the gig economy. And so through transporting essential workers and supporting local restaurants through delivery, the gig economy has been critical to help businesses, workers, and the public cope during the COVID-19 pandemic. Can you discuss how Postmates and Uber have specifically supported workers, small businesses, and consumers during this pandemic? And maybe we'll start with you, Brian.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, while the pandemic has definitely affected passenger transportation operations, I think platform companies like Uber and Postmates have been critical in helping the community during this time. I mean, first, we've already served an important role by helping to transport everyone from frontline essential workers like doctors and nurses to hospitals and healthcare centers when public transportation options are limited. We also committed 10 million free rides and food delivery to healthcare workers, seniors, and people in need free of charge. But we also recognize that there's a lot of folks who are hurt indirectly during the pandemic and not necessarily because of just a COVID diagnosis. So we've partnered with groups like domestic violence organizations and local governments in cities across the country and have provided 50,000 free rides to shelters and safe spaces and more than 45,000 free meals for those groups as well. I also think it's important that I note that we've been involved in transportation of essential goods. And since the crisis started, Uber Freight, which is our truck logistic line of business, has moved over 1 billion pounds of emergency relief supplies, and that includes food and water, hospital beds, and face masks, and more. And we helped keep drivers safe and healthy by distributing free sanitation kits, face masks, care packages, and more. And I also want to point out, I think people ask this pretty frequently, what have we done to protect drivers and riders during the pandemic? Well, we've committed $50 million in PPE, including all of those things I mentioned earlier, like masks and cleaning supplies and hand sanitizers. And we've already sourced 30 million masks and distributed them to 1.4 million drivers free of charge. I think we're going to continue those efforts, as long as things are still returning back to, as cities are still trying to reopen.
Thank you, Brandon. Wow, that's quite an investment. I had no idea. Thank you for sharing that. And Vikram, we'll turn it to you.
Yeah, I think that for us, we've seen a huge sort of shift in the way that the world interacts with delivery. Once upon a time, I think certainly I would use Postmates when I was hungover on a lazy Sunday and I wanted a burrito delivered to me. But I think just like everything Brian laid out, we take very seriously that in some respects, the adoption of delivery services has leapfrogged a few years into the future to meet the current moment around the pandemic. We certainly on the gig worker side take very seriously the designation by the Department of Homeland Security that they are essential workers, so are also investing or have also invested in nationwide access to things like PPE, to non-contact delivery, which is sort of a new way that we engineered the handoff of items in our product, and frankly, working with municipalities and state governments around the country to make sure that we are quickly able to implement new regulations that have come up as a result of COVID around the gig economy. But I think what's been most interesting is our experimentation from a policy perspective around the types of benefits that can support them. Complementing what Brian laid out, we stood up a fleet relief fund that was actually there if a worker had a nervous cough that they wanted to get checked out, or they wanted to engage a medical system through and offset the cost of a copay, we actually would start paying out sums of money just to make sure that they were economically supported. And then we also implemented a two-week COVID leave type program to emulate, a bit of a sick leave type policy nationwide. Then as the crisis further went on, we recognized that there are additional challenges in which when school closures were a thing and childcare services sort of dried up, there was this false choice that we were hearing from some gig economy workers that they could either choose to go out and earn or stay at home and take care of their loved ones. And we thought that was a false trade-off that they had to make. So we actually piloted and rolled out in the states of New York and California family care and child care relief, which would help offset the cost of average child care services that we mapped out with Paid Leave USA, known as Plus, just to be able to kind of help out in an interesting way. And so when it comes to the gig economy, I do think, Josh, that there are a lot of investments that platform companies have taken to move goods into communities, to support businesses. For example, Postmates elevates Black and Brown owned businesses in the app at a higher clip than we ever in the past to make sure that distressed communities aren't being looked over in this pandemic in the same way that we might be inclined to order goods from the most famous brand in our neighborhood, which tend to maybe not always be in distressed communities. And we've seen a 400% increase in sales for Black and Brown owned businesses in the platform right now. So there are merchant-based investments, and then there are company investments or experimentation on benefits for gig workers. But I'll be honest, and I might be editorializing a bit here, there are steps the private sector can and should take, and there are steps that the public sector really has to take. And I think that to meet us where we're at in order to continue to do this, we need to go back to what Brian kicked this whole conversation off around, which is really making sure that as you think about COVID relief, stimulus packaging, or just benefits for workers nationwide around the pandemic, that we're extending those both to employees or for previous employees, but also the self-employed workers to make sure no gig worker gets left behind in that overall vision of how we're supporting them.
Thank you, Vikram. And I want to make sure I get you in this conversation, Anurag, and I have a question specifically for you in Infosys. But I do want to let everyone know, as we have about 11 minutes left in the panel, I would like to see if there's some questions from the audience. So feel free to use the chat box. And if you'd like to ask a few questions, we're going to try to leave some time to at least answer one or two of those. So Anurag, in recent years, remote work's been around for some time. But the conversation around the gig economy and gig work has been something that's been talked about again over the last 2 to 5 years more and more and continues to grow. However, COVID-19 has expedited this process of the gig economy much quicker than originally expected. How has this changed Infosys's business model and accelerating the pace of technological change? And how have you guys coped with that during these COVID-19 times?
Yeah, it's that's a really hard question, but there is an answer. Now, exactly what that answer is, I'm not 100% sure, nor do I think a lot of people are. One thing is, it has the COVID-19 pandemic, the increased demand for digitization, and work from home, have all created a realization that there is a gig economy that never existed in the way it will within the work that we do in IT services, right? It's this idea that um, if 50 people aren't gathering in an office, right, to work on a project together, and you're farming out specific roles, right, all of a sudden you're saying, well, I don't need to use that role from within the company. Like, let's say it's digital design. Well, we have a partnership with the Rhode Island School of Design. We could send that small packet of work, which is a 3-week assignment, right, to the Rhode Island School of Design, right? Or we can send it over to this small company in Seattle, or we can, all of a sudden, the more democratized the work gets and the more diffuse it gets geographically, you can create digital packets of work that don't necessarily require, right, everybody to be a full-time 100% Infosys employee, right? Have a great affiliation with the company, but then it becomes a thing of, as I was saying before, if you're going to work with, Wake Tech Community College in Raleigh, which we do, is all right. Well, for this little piece of work that we see coming up time and again with clients across the country, why don't we create a little SWAT team here? And again, that SWAT team ends up being their own group, whether they be just a bunch of individuals, or if many of them become full-time Infosys employees. It's about being nimble in how we give out the packets of work. It's a modularity that's leading to an evolution of gig and everyday tech work. So I said a lot of words. I'm not even sure what it means, right? Like, I mean, I think that we're all gonna have to figure out how the dust settles here. But if you just imagine kind of how all the kids are being educated now, I mean, and I mentioned that might have an impact on universities. Well, we're a big company now that it's all being work from home. How does it affect the fact that we just built 6 gigantic, beautiful centers, right? What do we do with that capital expenditure? Like, what? So we're learning, but I think because of the demand for digitization, you have opportunities to really create a whole new type of workforce that you didn't before.
Great, thank you for that answer. That was a lot in like less than a minute. Great job. This question has been brought up a lot in the news. A major policy topic around the gig economy is the classification of gig economy workers as independent contractors, and whether there needs to be a third way of envisioning the workforce. Can you discuss the benefits of the independent contractor more generally, and also if there is a potential third way option of operations? And I'd like to begin this conversation with Brian, and then also hear from Vikram.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And I know Vikram's brought this up a couple times already. I think from Uber's perspective, we definitely believe that our current employment system is outdated and unfair. And it's that way because it forces a binary choice upon workers. Either be an employee with, the full suite of traditional benefits but less flexibility, or be an independent contractor with more flexibility but limited protections. I would say, unlike traditional employees, drivers have total freedom to choose whenever and however they drive so that they can fit their work around their life, not the other way around. And that type of freedom has real value and simply doesn't exist with traditional employment. Employment model would decimate that. But we think we can combine the best of both worlds. So let's ensure independent work opportunities to all the hundreds of thousands of workers that use our platform, but also make sure we provide them with meaningful benefits. And we've already proposed an initiative that would do just that. So we're proposing a system of portable benefits accounts that would allow workers to withdraw funds for the benefits that they want, whether it's paid time off or for health insurance. We also proposed a baseline safety net for independent workers beyond just those funds, because we think that platform companies should be required to provide occupational accident insurance, which is something that I think Victor mentioned earlier, that would also cover medical expenses and disability payments for accidents and injuries that occur, while on the job. So we think there's a better way. We think that, it's not this binary choice that's been forced upon workers. We think there is a third way that makes sense. And we think drivers overwhelmingly support that opinion too.
Thanks, Brian. And Vikram, do you have more to add to that?
Yeah, I would echo that. I mean, I think right now that system that he laid out was built, right after World War II, and I think it didn't contemplate a lot of the technologies that we're talking about today, and that's okay. And I think being open to evolving that system is not undercutting employment protections in this country. I think it's just iterating on them in the same way that we've all had to, adapt and apply ourselves in our business models and support our communities amidst a pandemic. And we've been able to iterate time and time again. I will say that one of those political considerations often draws the ire of people on the campaign trail or within Congress or policymakers about just this binary of how Brian laid out. It should be employees with benefits or contractors without. But we've seen examples that are alluding exactly to this, the portability of accounts that Brian acknowledges. We've seen the Affordable Care Act that extends the ability for an independent contractor to enroll in an open exchange. We've seen members of Congress with bipartisan cohesion introduce portability in retirement accounts, for example. I do think, though, it's important to recognize that even if there are these fights or spirited discussions that are taking root at the state level, I think we also sort of need to build towards a recognition that while that state experimentation happens, whether it's legislatively or by engaging voters or through other means, we also need to encourage our colleagues on Capitol Hill and in this administration or future administrations to really create more certainty there, because the certainty that we're looking for is not just about the companies. The certainty is exactly what Brian laid out, is how do you maintain that flexibility that's being utilized right now, because a lot of unemployed workers are looking for low barrier of entry ways to earn money, but also build additional benefits on top. I think the policy proposal that Brian laid out is a good one and a smart one, but we should also look around us to see that there are other ones out there being proposed by non-corporations, all signifying the fact that America's recognition that something's got to give has to be met, and we're hopeful that we'll continue to build progress on that with certainly a future Congress, but also with lawmakers today.
Thank you. Well, given the time, I don't think we're going to get to immigration questions or data centers questions, but I do want to encourage everyone again to read the white paper on workforce that covers those additional areas. And I want to ask one final question to the panelists, and given the time, if you can try to keep your response to 1 minute across the board, and we'll close after that. Anurag, will probably begin with you. The final question I'd like to know is, what is one initiative, program, or policy, but one thing that you are the most proud of the company you work for that is working on to build a modern tech workforce and create more opportunities for Americans?
Yeah, I think it's the newfound flexibility that we are finding in the success in working with community colleges, with recently skilled individuals who've come through us through our nonprofit and community partnerships. It's basically expanding the pie. We're just trying to, as a company, get into rinse and repeat with that, right? And just kind of make it the normal course, and hopefully others, our competitors, others in the industry, our clients, will kind of get in this habit of, let's look at the whole pie and we'll all benefit. And so there's those who might not have access. Let's get them access. There's those who might not have opportunity in the back end. Let's help get them opportunity, partner with governments, as many partnerships as we can. But we're well on our way there, and I'm really, really happy with that direction.
Thank you. We'll go to Vikram next, and then we'll close with Brian.
Yeah, ours is kind of a tiny example. Mentioned, apprenticeship programs that we've implemented at Postmates. We've also found with a few community partners in different cities around the country, pre-apprenticeship programs that sort of start that learning on the job while also earning an income that's Department of Labor certified, as an interesting way to tap into younger talent to get them animated about jobs, that are germane to our workforce. And a lot of the programming pipelines that we have found in major metropolitan cities like Chicago or San Francisco or Los Angeles have also brought us in pre-apprentices that happen to identify as dreamers or DACA recipients or just undocumented immigrants as well. So I think being able to pair the need for more skills opportunities, but also with the lens of being more inclusive and bringing more types of workers of all backgrounds under the tent is a bit of just something we're very proud of at Postmates of being able to lean into.
Thank you. And then Brian?
Yeah, we work on a lot of really cool stuff at Uber between, self-driving at ATG and Uber Elevate and Uber Freight. But I'll just go back to our Arizona State University partnership, which I highlighted earlier on the call. I mean, it's just the scale of this partnership that really matters. This is going to have a meaningful impact for the opportunity and growth for hundreds and thousands of drivers and their families across the country.
Great. Well, I want to first thank all of the attendees that joined today, both the larger event, but also this breakout session, but also give a sincere thank you to Brian, Anurag, and Vikram for walking us through some of this great innovations that your companies and you individually are doing. So with that, we are going to close today's breakout session. Thank you for all of your work.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.